The top players in fantasy basketball, top 24 points leagues, top 24 category leagues, and the best podcast introducer in the world. He's always number one. It doesn't go down ever. It's Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and there are two R's in strawberry. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From now through to September the 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket thanks to YouTube and YouTube TV. Go to FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. I'm just a poor guy that's sitting here asking if you've got a spare thumb. Thumb to spare, anyone? Because if you do, I'd like it. Drop the thumbs, the comments, the double bangs. We're here. We are here. And do this show every year about this time. It's the 4th of September currently, and it's a weird show that I know people love to look at and love to watch, but I want to really, really stress the things that are important to take out of this. We are talking top 24 Yahoo Points leagues, ESPN Points leagues, head-to-head category leagues, rotisserie leagues, 9-cat rotisserie leagues. There's nuances between all of them. But as I will stress, and I will stress this all the way through, when we do drafts and rankings, is that the guy at 13, and the guy at 19, and the guy at 24, and the guy at 10 might not be that different. But we all have to put them in a certain order. And I could go back and forward on so many different ways. And then what you do in round one and what you do in round two can change. And there's so many different ways to look at things. And how if your league has a slight tweak to playoff schedule or bench depth, it changes all of this stuff. A key way to look at it, right, I think, is if you've ever done an auction draft before, you will understand that the pricing of players is not the best player goes for 70, then the next guy goes for 69, the next guy goes for 68, the next guy goes for 67, the next guy goes for 66, the next guy goes for 65, the next guy goes for 64. It doesn't work that way. Because the gaps and the differences between the players is not just simple, the same every time. So the top player, Victor Wembanyama, Nikola Jokic, they might go for 80, they might go for 90, they might go for $100 in some leagues. Half of the budget. The third best player might go for 56. Well, not the same. The 7th best player might go for 42. The 10th best player might go for 42. The 20th best player might go for 40. Right? So we understand that concept in an auction format. But in a snake, we don't always do it. So when we're talking about these ones, and this is again, every year you will hear me, you will hear other fantasy analysts, you will hear yourself and your friends talk about picking at the end of the first round, picking in the second round, go, man, I actually hate the second round. Bloody, I hate it. Hate the players here. Oh, I hate these picks. It's because realistically, when we compare the value to where that sits to the first 5-6 guys, these are third round players. These are fourth round players if we compare that value. But because of the way a snake works, we're forced to take them at 8 or 12 or 13. You go, man, I really don't like that guy in the second round, but I'd love him in round 3. But we can't do anything about that. We can't just say, we'll all pass on round 2, then round 3 becomes round 2. Look, what's the point of that? So that is a hard thing to get your head around. And that's where we can get some wild differences. You're going to see some names in these listed in different positions than what you might think, and that's okay because all it takes is such small variations to jump up, jump back, weird things to happen, cold streaks, hot streaks. The differences become very, very small. And I will say this a lot, like when we looked last year, if we just look fantasy points-wise, number 1 player 60 points, number 12 player 45. Big difference. And then number 24 is like 42. Number 36 is like 39. And 48 is like 37. Everyone's just pushed together. So just understand that. And you're going to see this, that we have a real like grouping of players in certain little areas, you can say tiers, I guess, and then things just get very wild. I'll talk more about the category league side of things later on. We're going to start with points leagues. We're going to start with Yahoo Points scoring. Now, if your scoring system, I'm going to do Yahoo and ESPN default scoring. If your scoring system's different, sorry, can't go through every single permutation and combination of fantasy points scoring options. We do that on Basketball Monster. You can just put your settings in and you see how everyone projects based on the stats that we put out. But there's always got to be little nuances there. What's your risk tolerance of this player? And you'll have different risk tolerances than what I will. You'll have different ideas of how you project someone. It's very easy to say, well, this guy's going to do everything that he did last season. I'm not about that. That's not how I like to do things, and that I will get things wrong and I will get things right. Because I like to try and see where things are going versus like, let's just repeat the past and we'll see from there. I don't think that's a good way of doing it. But that is how I approach it, and it is important to understand how I approach that stuff. I think it is anyway. Let's start with the first 6 players for a Yahoo Points League. Victor Wembanyama is going to sit at number 1. But if you don't want to take Wemby at number 1, if you think there is some worry about an injury or maybe the Spurs sit in more games or you're just not really sure what happens this season, then don't. Take Jokic at 1. That's okay. If you are watching this on video, the numbers next to the name, I have included Fantrax ADP now, so it's Yahoo ADP, Fantrax ADP, ESPN ADP. Interesting, Wemby goes 1-1-3, so 3 on ESPN. That's weird. Jokic is at 2, and he's 2 across the board. So no one's actually got an ADP of 1 on ESPN. So they're sort of splitting the decision there. But like Wembanyama, Jokic, Yahoo Points, they're 1 and 2. That's very hard for me to argue. The argument will then come into this next group. And I went back and forth on how I was going to do this. I am putting Giannis Antetokounmpo at number 3. His ADP sits at 6, 7, and 5. Remember, this is Yahoo Points League. And you will say, Josh, Luka Doncic will average more. And I do agree with that. And if you are playing a default Yahoo playoff schedule where the first week of your playoffs is a 2-game week for Dallas, then I would have Luka here. You shouldn't play that schedule because it's terrible. But if that is what you do, then that is okay. But the difference, like if that is your championship week, which is what I recommend that you do, you finish your season March the 23rd. The Bucks play 4 games that week. The Mavericks play 2. And let's say Luka averages 58 points a game and Giannis averages 54. 4 per game is a big difference, yes? So Giannis, he might play all 4 that week. He could. He could play all 4 in that championship week and he gets you 220 fantasy points. And Doncic gets you 116. It's an unrecoverable difference from that in that first round scenario. Now, of course, maybe Giannis sits a game. What if he plays 3? And then he gets 160 fantasy points versus 115. Still a big difference. If Giannis misses 2, then the difference between the 2 guys is 10 points, which you can find off the waiver wire. And yeah, you do have to get to the playoffs first. But taking Giannis over Luka doesn't make your team dreadful that you can't get there. I'm not suggesting that you go, well, you know what? Luka, terrible schedule. I'm taking Ayo Dosunmu at pick 3. It's not what we're doing here. We're taking a very, very good player. I do have Luka at 4, and I debated having him at 5 just for that playoff schedule thing. But I'm not worried about Shai necessarily. I just don't think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is an absolute slam dunk, going to average 57 fantasy points or anything like that this season. I worry that some of the very, very high defensive stats from last season and even some of the efficiency stuff might pull back a little bit, which just knocks a little bit off what he does. But he's fine there. If you wanted to interchange Shai and Luka at 4 and 5, I do get that. If you want to put Shai at 3 instead of Giannis, I get that as well. I think that is all reasonable stuff. At number 6, I have Anthony Davis. Yes, he played a lot of games last year. No, I'm not banking on him playing 75 again this season. I'm not. And as I will continue, people often think that what I say can be inconsistent with this. Like, I find it pretty consistent. But like, my thing is always, if someone is hurt in the past, that doesn't mean they'll always be hurt. And if someone was healthy the previous season, that doesn't mean that they will stay healthy. So if I have someone who had a really healthy season like Davis, I'm not expecting them to play 75, 76 games again. And the reason I had Davis at like 11 or 12 last season wasn't because of health. He just improved his free throws and his rebounds went up significantly, and that bumped him back up. So I'm not sitting here banking on Davis being a 75, 76 game player. my reasoning on all this has been pretty clear about how the particular injury guys that I'm concerned about and why I am. But I'm never going to be like, I am drafting this guy because he will never get hurt or because he showed he didn't get hurt, because that can flip in a minute. So there is I hope there's an understanding with some of it. There's obviously a little bit of nuance and gut feel put there, but I would be okay taking Davis at 6. But also I don't feel super great about it. I feel okay about it, but I don't feel super great about it. That was a long preamble, and the other sections here are going to be a lot shorter. But I just wanted to get a lot of that stuff out because a lot of it will repeat across the different formats. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, who have been with us for such a long time sponsoring this show, and I've talked about them for years now. But they've got a little bit of something different for you. Today, September the 4th, 5th, whatever, who cares? All the way through to September the 22nd, FanDuel has an offer for every customer. You place a $5 bet and you get 3 weeks free trial, and tomorrow, NFL season is starting, 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. Thanks to YouTube and YouTube TV. If you've got that YouTube TV base plan, well, that means you can watch every out-of-market Sunday afternoon NFL game for free. For those 3 weeks, easy. All you need is a Google account. You need to have a valid form of payment. And, of course, you can cancel that at any time. So go to FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. And don't forget to gamble responsibly. Okay. So, still talking Yahoo Points in the top 24 there. I've gone through the top 6 guys. Let's get through and talk about the next group. And this is where things start to get, as the kids would say, skibbity. Maybe. I think that's right. But it's weird. It's very weird. I've got Domantas Sabonis at 7. And I'm going to pick nits on every one of these guys and tell you why you shouldn't. Also why you should. Sabonis is very good at points leagues. His ADP is 12, 15, and 12. And when I say ADPs like that, I mean Yahoo, Fantrax, ESPN. 12, 15, 12. Sabonis has now the addition of DeMar DeRozan, and I don't really know how that will work. I feel a level of some confidence in what he does with his rebounding. That won't change. His scoring wasn't even high usage anyway, so it should be insulated somewhat. I think his assist will be okay, but there'll be some drops. But it's the other guys that come in this next group. This is where we start to be in that situation where you go, yeah, like I'd love to take this guy at 14, but there's 15 different guys that you could say that about. Like, what do I do in this spot? Like, I could easily make the argument that Jason Tatum would be a pick here, and then you could make that argument. But I don't feel super confident about him because A, he wasn't anywhere near this last year. I've got Tatum at 10 here, by the way. The reason that you get excited about him, and similar for Sabonis, is not getting hurt, which is no guarantee to hold. It's just a weird spot. This spot of a draft is very, very challenging. And you're going to take someone that I feel like you're not comfortable with. So I've got Sabonis there at 7. At number 8, I've got Trae Young. I think Trae is going to take a step up this season. He's going to see, I hope, look, there's a chance that his shooting doesn't improve or get that really high 3-point percentage back. That's possible. Whatever. It's a bonus if he does. But I think we get extra usage, a couple more shots per game. Maybe we get a little bit more in the assist range because putting Dyson Daniels in DeJounte Murray's place should help him. And again, part of this is just like the dearth of other options. At 9, I've got Goose, Anthony Edwards. Now, Edwards is a better points league guy than category league guy. We're relatively established on what his role is. The Timberwolves team didn't change very much. If he gets to the line 1 to 2 more times per game, then he pushes 28, 29 points a game, real life points, and that makes him really stable here. And if you wanted to take Ant Edwards at 7, ahead of Sabonis or Young, I think it's reasonable. It's defensible. And Jason Tatum's ADP is 7 on Fantrax and ESPN. It's 10 on Yahoo. He's never been an awesome points league player. That's just not how his game is usually translated. Part of Tatum's value has always been the way that rankings are always put out there. They're always presented in a, I'll say this again, and I'll continue to say it, the way that it's presented is like we're all playing a season-long 9-cat roto or 8-cat roto, which, of course, we're not. 5% of us are, but the rest of everyone else isn't. But the way rankings get put out suggests that. So Tatum, like for example, last season averaged 46 fantasy points. That was 10th best. 10th best. So I think that's okay to have him there. At 11, I've got Tyrese Halliburton. The injuries did hurt him last season, for sure. He was 14th, not 14th per game, so he was 16th per game for Yahoo Fantasy Points. It's not very good. But again, we're in a situation where, like, who do we take here in this area? It's a weird spot. And you will notice that the man that I said that I will not take in the first round, Joel Embiid, I've got at pick 12, which is the first round. But hear me out. Joel Embiid is very clearly a top 3 fantasy player per game. Really whatever format you're in. If I said I wouldn't take him in the first round, I'm putting him at 12. It's because 12 and 13 is the same pick. It's the same person. It doesn't matter. I could have put someone else at 12 just to hold true to it and then picked him at 13. It doesn't matter. But I wanted to put him at 12 just so he looks a little bit higher on this list. It's the same thing. That is the earliest I'd be happy to take Embiid because much like when I talk about injuries to other players, I've never really had a gigantic concern with Embiid until he had multiple meniscus injuries on the same knee with same surgery on that same part of the knee. That is a problem. I'm not saying that he's Lonzo Ball, because Lonzo's had the same injury on that same part of the knee and multiple surgeries hasn't worked. It is a different thing, right? But that recurrent meniscus injury, there's only so much that meniscus can take. Shout out to Brandon Roy, legend player, career cut short. Not saying again that Embiid's going to do that, but that makes me not want to do it earlier on. And when we get to 12, I take that risk. But I don't really want to do it any earlier. So that's where we're at with that. And now, like, I did these numbers and I poured over them and I looked at them and I double-checked them and I tried to find ways to get it to sit and I still hate it. I'm not, again, this part of the draft, it stinks. I hate it. But I've got Alperen Şengün at number 13 and I hate it. And if push came to shove, I don't know that I would take him at 13. But I project him out really highly. I don't think his injury at the end of last season is too much of a bother. He averaged 43 fantasy points last season. I think he can push that to 45 or 46. He could have easily do more than what Halliburton did from a points perspective last season. And I have a level of confidence in him more than some of the guys below. But I don't feel good about this at all. The difference between him and the rest of these players that you can see on this list is marginal. But the next guy on the list is LeBron. He's literally 40 years old in December. And he was sort of healthy last season as well, but he has had some lower body injuries, and when you're 40, that's what happens. So how do I feel confident in that? Devin Booker. He's a good player. He put up really solid numbers. He's probably going to lose some assists because Tyus Jones is there and going to do something. There's a new coach in Mike Budenholzer who probably cut some of the minutes down from Booker. Because he's not going to play 37 under Budenholzer. I'd be pretty shocked if he did. Budenholzer doesn't roll that way. And he likes to use more depth. And their bench is actually better. But what's my next option? Well, my next option on this list at number 16 is LaMelo Ball. Who, on a per-game basis, is way better than all of these guys. He's probably a top 8 player. But, as much as I am not going to say I expect that he gets hurt again, because I don't expect that he gets hurt again, I am human. I understand that he played 50 games combined the last 2 years or whatever it was. And there is a concern with his ankle. There has to be a level of concern of that ankle spraining that many times. Not like the knee, not like Embiid, not like Kawhi. That's not the worry for me. But I just have to have a little fear of it. A little fear. But push comes to shove. Like I could easily take him at 13. Easily LaMelo. I could easily do that and push him ahead. 17, I've got Scott Barnes. Scotland was great last season. He improved a ton. And, that's where we're at. We'll see how it goes with Barrett and Quickly. We still don't really know the offensive hierarchy in terms of usage and how they'll do that because Barnes did push back a little bit. Whether that was just a let's see what happens or a feeling out process, I don't know. But I don't think that it's a crazy thing to say that Scotty Barnes is the worst offensive player between him, Barrett, and Quickly. Now, he's obviously the best defensive player, and he is a very good distributor of the ball. But in terms of just scoring, is he the worst out of that group? I'm not sure. But he's out of all those guys in this list, he's probably the one I feel the most rock solid about, Giggity, in that 17 spot. I've got Ja Morant at number 18. Now, Morant's ADP is 18 on ESPN. All right, bang on. Yahoo's got him at 37. We're talking Yahoo Points scoring here, which doesn't mean you have to play on Yahoo. It's just their scoring system. Yeah, 37 for Ja Morant, obviously pricing in, well, he only played 9 games. I'm not worried about his shoulder. But he's had a reckless style of, say, on and off court behavior that has led to missed time. And the way that his game is played does give me some worry that he will miss a little bit of time. But I'm not sitting here going, well, he was suspended and then he played 9 games, so that's, he's not going to hit 50. I don't have that worry with him. So I'm okay. We're looking at Monsieur Morant in that position. The rest of the top 24, the next 6 players, I do have Paolo Banchero here at 19. We know that Paolo is a much better points league guy than category league guy. His ESPN ADP is 22. Fine. Reasonable. You want to go ahead of Şengün? Do it. That second round is one of the biggest jumbles ever. So do it. I got Jim Harden here. His ESPN ADP is 46, which is insane, but it's 23 on Yahoo. He's going to see more usage, almost certainly. No Westbrook, no Paul George. Less Kawhi is my guess. Has to go up, has to go up. Love it here. I got Steph down this line. You say, why is Steph at 21? His Yahoo ADP is 12. Steph is going to have to do more this season. You'd hope that he does more this season because he was the 32nd ranked player in Yahoo Points leagues last season. Don't get it twisted about what Steph is as a player. He's an awesome player, obviously, and he's starting to age and get worse, but he was 32nd. So that Yahoo ADP of 12 for a points league is an insane decision to do, I think. At 22, I've got Don Mitchell. His numbers are sort of all over the place. 17th on Yahoo, 12th for Fantrax, 20th on ESPN. He fell off as the season went on and as the knee injuries caused a problem. There are 2 ways to look at that. Well, Kenny Atkinson might manage the knee injury better, so therefore he won't get the second half drop-off caused by the knee injury. But the way to manage the knee injury or manage the risk of the knee injury is by, for the first 3.5 months of the season, not playing 36.5 minutes a game and instead playing 33, which Atkinson told us that he was going to be more cognizant of his players' minutes. So you lose 2 minutes, you lose 3 minutes, and your production dips. It's very hard not to. And that's where I am with Donnie right there, who averaged like 46 fantasy points last season. So, again, you want to make an argument that he goes ahead of Steph? Yep, do it. But I see Steph getting more usage this season. I see Mitchell usage staying the same, but fewer minutes. And it might be enough to push him back, because you're well aware the 2 biggest factors in fantasy points production are usage and minutes. It's the 2 biggest factors. At number 23, I've got Jalen Brunson, who's at 22 and an ADP. Brunson will almost assuredly step back. Last season, he averaged 44 fantasy points. That's pretty good. That was good for 20th. But he was rolling at 37 usage for the last 2 months of the season, and that won't be what happens this year. And then, you want to get a little risky? I got Zion at pick 24. Zion looks slim. Zion, second half, was amazing. Hurt his hamstring in the playoffs, but he was putting up ridiculous numbers. I think they're going to lean a little bit more into Zion with a bit higher usage, and I think there's a real chance of the field goal percentage coming back. I'm expecting a real big year from him, but it's hard to do, man. Like, taking some of these players in this area, like it's hard to take that risk. I get that because of the risks and what you've seen in the past, and breaking that habit is it's hard to do. Like Zion, for example, last season, he was 33rd in fantasy points. He averaged 40 fantasy points, about the same as what Steph did. But I do think he's going to do more this season. I hope he does more. That would be good if he does more. That took a long time. So I was going to do points and categories all together. I think I still will, because I think when we go through the rest of these ranks, I've given a lot of discussion about these guys, so I don't need to maybe break them down quite as aggressively. We're doing ESPN Points leagues now, the top 24 players there. It's not that different at the top, honestly. The scoring system is, but the order that I've got these players in stays the same. Wembanyama at 1, Jokic at 2, Giannis at 3, Luka at 4, Shea at 5, Davis at 6. I think for points leagues, that is a pretty stable top 6 players. I find it hard to make an argument either way. Change the order if you want. Put Luka at 3, put Shea at 3. Whatever. Take Davis out of the top 6 if you want. But I think that is it's obviously the same that I've got for Yahoo. I think it's a reasonable top 6 picks, and it's hard, I think, to go wrong there. Even if you did take Luka at 3 and you got the 2-week playoff week, like, okay, you see what you can do with that. If you skip on Luka in that 3 or 4 slot because you want more assurity in the playoffs, that's okay too. We can deal with those problems. So it's hard for me to get, I'm sure someone will, but it'd be hard for me to get worked up about that top 6 there. The next 7 guys, relatively similar to the Yahoo Points situation as well. I got Halliburton at 7, Jason Tatum 8, Trae Young 9, Sabonis at 10, because free throw shooting does have an impact on ESPN Points, so that drops him a little bit to back. Got Anthony Edwards at 11 and Joel Embiid at 12. But that is the same 12 players that I had for Yahoo that I've got for ESPN. Just the order's slightly different. But again, if you wanted to, and we don't do this on Basketball Monster, but if you put projections out there and chucked randomizers on them, like I think if you did like a 5% randomization on each category or whatever you want to do, I think you'd end up with these guys all in this same spot, but the order of them just mixed up every time. That's sort of the closeness I see between these players, and I doubt that anyone would really jump up into that top 6 group. You might have players coming from behind jumping into this area as well. But again, remember, we're talking late second round-ish values in comparison to the top group that we have to take in the middle to end of the first round, which is always a frustrating thing to do. Some sort of slight changes to some of the order here in this next group. LeBron does do better in an ESPN Points format. I have moved him up to 13. The combination of LeBron and Embiid at 12 and 13 is not great, but that might be a top 4 and top 8 player per game, and if it works, it works. Got Şengün at 14, Ball at 15, Harden 16, Brunson 17, and Scott Barnes at 18. But again, Brunson's value improves here because of his efficiency. His usage will come down from last season. But these are all very, very similar names. Make a discussion. Put Ball ahead of LeBron. Put Harden ahead of all of them. Put Barnes at 13 if you want. The differences here are rather marginal, I think. Like in terms of what did Sabonis averaged 50 fantasy points last season. Maybe he pushes back to 48 this year. Tatum averaged 47. Maybe he does 47 again. What have we got? Oh, the Tatum was in the other group. Like LaMelo Ball is, last season he averaged 45.5 in the games that he played, so that's okay. James Harden was at 41. Şengün was at 43. 1-2 fantasy points is nothing. You average 1 more point per game, 24.5 real life points to 25.5 real life points. People would look at those numbers and go, yeah, he's really consistent. And in fantasy, that gives you an extra point per game, and it might jump you 5 spots. Remember that part of it. I'll keep saying that because it is important, I think. The last grouping of the top 24 on ESPN Points, a lot of the same names. I've got Steph at number 19. I've got Devin Booker at 20. Ja Morant at 21. Some of Ja's free throw percentage issues, which don't play in on Yahoo. They do play in a bit here, so he falls a little bit. A couple of different names here. With number 22, I've got Cade Cunningham. And at number 23, I've got Kevin Durant. There's been a lot of discussion about me hating Kevin Durant this season, which I don't. There's my concerns on Durant. He's never been this absolutely elite, especially recently, elite fantasy points league guy. He hasn't really been that, even though he did average 48 a game last season. But he did that averaging 37 minutes a night, which I don't think will happen again. His second half of the season saw him fall outside the top 40 for points leagues and category leagues. His free throw attempts fell down. And when the team was healthy, when the Suns were healthy, when Booker and Beal played together, Durant averaged under 4 assists a game. And now Jones is there. His mid-range shooting dropped as well over the course of the season. He's 36. I'm not going to bank on 75 games, so I'm just going to be lower on Durant than others are. A great player, been a consistently good player, but at some point things do start to change, and the trajectory of Durant as the season went on with those high minutes was troubling. And like I said with Mitchell, if you want to reduce that fatigue that may have caused that, well, that means you've got to play 3 fewer minutes a game all season, which brings the numbers down anyway. So that's why I have Durant lower than other people do. I've got Cade there at 22. Who knows? He was awesome down the stretch last season. They've got a new coach, a better player and shooter with Tobias Harris on that team than what they were using last season. And it's risky. It might not work. But we could say that about nearly all of those, including the guy at number 24, which is Zion Williamson. We get relatively sizable fluctuations in value year to year in fantasy, outside of maybe the top guys. But even then, you do get the players that jump quite a bit. So just don't be afraid to trust what it is you think. You might think, Josh, what are you talking about? Kevin Durant is Kevin Durant. Why are you so down on him? Or how could you possibly trust LaMelo? And if you think that, that's okay. Because there is wide ranges in the production from a lot of these players. And it's just, we're trying to find trends and trying to follow them and trying not to just assume that what happened for 3 years will continue to happen, because it doesn't quite work that way. Not quite. Let's go through and just do the categories now as well. So let's do head-to-head 9 categories. Part of the way that I look at rankings for category leagues is, again, it's going to be different to a lot of people do. People will reference the rankings they see on Yahoo. They'll reference the rankings that they see on Basketball Monster as well, which is obviously where I work. But you'll see a straight Z-score related 9 category ranking, which I think, like I referenced earlier, is not a great way of playing category leagues head-to-head, because that tends to look at the way that we accumulate value over the course of the season. Where we've got games caps in a Roto format, but that's not head-to-head. We are a 1-week sample size against an opponent where we're streaming for max games in a lot of situations. So I want to downplay some categories and reduce the importance of high variance categories, because if you're over-indexing and over-relying upon them, it can lead to misevaluations. So that is the way that I've been trying to work. And it looks different at times because of the way that I've been trying to look at that. I say all that, and the top group is the same. Like, what's the difference here? We've got Wemby at 1, we've got Jokic at 2. I do have Giannis at 3. You don't have to twist my arm to say that you would take Luka there. Again, the 4 versus 2 playoff argument is there. If you want to have the argument, I don't want to punt free throws with Giannis, okay. If you're taking Giannis, that doesn't mean that you are punting threes as well. It's very, very simple to recover from threes. If you can say, well, Giannis has got some of his own injury worries, he does. Luka does too. Like, won't say Luka looked particularly healthy through the playoffs. So, if you want to do that, and look, if Luka had a 3-game playoff week and no 2s, no problem, I'd have him at 3 without any question at all. And if it is your standard Yahoo default settings for playoffs, I would still probably take Luka at 3, because at the first week of your playoffs, hopefully you're good enough to push into a bye and be okay. So I've got the same sort of order here. Giannis 3, Luka 4, Shea 5, Davis 6. I'm still thinking that there is maybe a step back for Shea this season. I worry a little bit about Luka in the playoff schedule. I also worry somewhat, does Luka just lose? Like, is there a shot that he loses with Clay there? Because I haven't really talked about that. Like, having Clay instead of Derek Jones Jr. is a very different scenario offensively. And yes, it's mostly likely others that take the shots back, but one shot difference is important. And Shea probably gets more usage. But what if that more usage or more assists leads to a decrease in the very high defensive numbers or even some of the efficiency stuff? So they're the concerns that we have there. But overall, it is the same group of top 6 players. The next grouping of guys in a head-to-head category format at number 7, I do have Tyrese Halliburton. That value of assists is very, very hard to come by in other spots. He could very easily lead the league in assists. Him, Harden, and Trey and Luka are going to be the top 4, I'm guessing, in that area. He is a lower scorer, obviously. We haven't seen him fully healthy with Siakam, so we're not really sure what that dynamic shows. but I've got him at 7. I've got Trae Young at 8. Now, most people would have Trae Young at 10 or 11. I just think, again, when I'm talking head-to-head, I just want to push volume. I want to get some volume in. I want to get some scoring, some threes, some assists. His steals were better. His free throws are absolutely elite, and it's very hard to find in other spots of drafts. I've got Tatum at 9, even though I'm not really sure he's a first-round player. But again, what does that mean? What does that mean? I've got Steph at 10. Now, very different to where I had him in the points leagues. And at 36, I'm not super interested in that. Like, I've got him there. I don't feel good about it. I'm not super interested. I just don't feel good about it. It's like, he's going to have to see more usage. So not only will he see more usage with Clay gone, but he's going to have to see more assists because Chris Paul is gone. And yeah, they brought in Melton, who's sort of a point guard, but not really. And Podziemski maybe does a little bit more. But I think we're going to see two things rise for Steph: usage and assist rate. And might cause him to break down earlier. And his steals were like horribly low. Maybe they go back to 1. Maybe they don't, but maybe they do. At 11, I've got Domantas Sabonis. Bad free throws. Not really sure where he fits. The DeRozan thing is a problem. The points will be low-ish in comparison, but again, who's the other option here? If you wanted to take Joel Embiid at 11, I feel very unconfident about it, but I get it if you wanted to do that. I've got Embiid at 12 again. Still not keen on taking him in the first round, but 12 is like it's a cusp pick. It's 12 or 13. Toss it up. Who cares? It's the same pick. So that's that next group. It's a really icky sort of group. And this next part is worse. At number 13, I've got James Harden, and I hate it. But Harden could go back to 20, 22 points, 9, 10 assists. It's not Paul George leaving. It's Paul George and Russell Westbrook leaving. So the guy that comes off the bench with the usage and assists and the guy in the starting lineup who handles the ball with usage are both gone. And I expect fewer games from Kawhi Leonard. Now maybe James Harden has absolutely no more gears to give. I don't think that's true, but maybe he doesn't. But I think there's going to be more from him. At 14, I've got Anthony Edwards, who in the general category league sense is not worth his pick at all. He's had some troubles generating, big rebounder assists. They're sort of mid. The scoring's good. The percentages are pretty good, and he improved his free throws quite a bit. I do think there is an extra step here and a little bit more free throw rate, but might not work. I've got LaMelo Ball here, who I am very confident will be a top 8, top 9 per game guy, but there's got to be an element of risk involved, and if you don't like that risk, then don't take him here. I've got Donovan Mitchell at 16. If you wanted to take Mitchell at 13, if you want to take Mitchell at 11 ahead of Sabonis, I think that is okay. My worry, again, is what if we just pull back some of those minutes Atkinson style? The man who took the Nets into the playoffs with an 11-man rotation. He won't do that in Cleveland, but he's also going to not run the Bickerstaff, I'm pretty sure. I've got Fred VanVleet at 17. Now, there'll be people who hate that. Obviously, the people who draft on ESPN, because his ADP is 92. VanVleet is just a solid back-end second-round player who's not a high-volume scorer, but he gets assists, he gets steals. His blocks were really up last season. They did start to taper off. He's got some bad field goals, but we're talking a head-to-head league here. We know how a head-to-head league works. His free throws are awesome. He hits volume threes. I don't think he's losing his job anytime. His minutes, unlike Mitchell's, aren't changing. I don't think he's playing less than 36, 37 a night. Ime Udoka will ride that hard. Giggity. At 18, I've got Paul George. If you want to flip Paul and James Harden, do it. If you wanted to push Fred VanVleet down 7 spots, I think it's reasonable as well. These are all very, very close. Paul George could be the number 3 guy in Philadelphia. He could take a huge Bradley Beal-esque step back. Or Maxey steps back a little bit. Don't know. It's a risky pick. Taking a player going to a new team is always going to be risky. And that is the essence, realistically, of round 2. At 19, I've got Devin Booker. I worry. I would have him higher if I was convinced that his assists would stay high, but I think they might push back a little bit. At 20, I've got Scotland Barnes. You want to take him ahead of Paul George and Fred VanVleet? Absolutely reasonable to do it, even though I have still shooting concerns, but the defensive stats, they were great. Do they hold? I think they do. 21, I've got LeBron. Old age, risk, percentages seem to vary every single season, which is the case for most, but he seemed to be more extreme. 22, it's Damian Lillard. Now, Lillard could be better than the last 10 people that I named. He had a very weird season where his shooting percentages were way down. He really struggled to sort of get his feet set in Milwaukee with a lot of personal off-court stuff and then the on-court upheaval of multiple coaches and a new team. He gets a full off-season with the team. He could easily jump ahead of so many of these players. At 23, I've got Jalen Brunson, and I think he's also got a chance to step back. And then, again, I do have Kevin Durant here at 24, and I don't feel good about it. Yes, when I was doing my tiers, and I reevaluate things all the time, every day. And then I had Kevin Durant, and I put it out, and I had him down in a low tier, and my projections still don't love him. But I really went back in and tried to dig into those projections. Go, well, what could be actually wrong here? What am I off on? And I said, okay, maybe I am docking his assists too much, so I added a little bit back on. I hadn't, I think I mentioned how he'd shot 82% from the line for 30 games. I hadn't projected that. I projected him to shoot a better free throw percentage than he shot last season at 86.5 or whatever. But maybe that goes back to 88. Maybe the knock that I put on his free throw attempts and that rate, maybe that does jump back up. And I said that if we get word from the NBA that hyper-aggressive calling of shots, calling of free throws changes, well, Durant's value goes back up because one of Kevin Durant's best features in fantasy was 89% shooting, 6 or 7 attempts from the line. That was always one of the best things. And it's why his points league value was never as high as his category league value, because for Yahoo Points, that doesn't mean anything. But one of the reasons you had Kevin Durant and you loved him in category and Roto leagues was field goals and free throw percentage being super high. But if your free throw attempts go way down, and they were way down, and your field goals drop a little bit, and he shot 42% from 3, what if that is 39? That's where I have my concerns. Now, you could have the arguments, and people did with me, and that's fine. You can call me out on that. I am not spending a first-round pick on Kevin Durant. This one's borderline to me. I could easily see Jalen Williams in this area. I could take Kawhi Leonard here. I could take it. There's a number of other players. But maybe I was just a little too harsh on some of those initial Kevin Durant projections. And I went back in and looked at it. And even then, I can't get him into the top 15. I can't find a way to get those numbers there, especially again. But if Budenholzer says everything I've done in the past is a lie, you are playing 37 a night again, well, then Durant jumps way back up. And then it does become that thing. But I'm not really confident. I have to go by what I know and what I've seen and what we've seen happen. And that's sort of where I'm going to sit on that. But that could be, there's the very easy ways that it's wrong on Durant. He plays 37 a night again. His assists don't stay down like they were when the team was healthy last season. And his free throw attempts go back from 3.8 to 6 a game. All that could happen. It's all of ifs, but all of that could happen. And I know I harped on about that because it was obviously pretty controversial, me saying that I just didn't have Kevin Durant really ranked high at all this season. Not that I hate him, not that I think he's bad. The gaps between value of players in this area of drafts is just changed by tiny little things. I have Durant projected at like 25, 8, and 4 with his customary low steals but high blocks and 54% shooting and 86 from the line, but that still means that that's not quite as good as others. And the week-to-week variance that can happen at times with percentages and that sort of variability in head-to-head leagues is not quite as beneficial to KD. Sorry, went on a bit long. Let's talk Roto. Very different scenario in Roto. Roto's a very different beast, but remembering again that most content, most rankings are tailored to a Roto setting, which is a failure, I think, because, again, that is not what people play. But that is how the things are set out. We look at averages per game of stats. Yahoo presents them as totals, which means nothing for a head-to-head league. That means nothing. This doesn't consider the short sample sizes of 3 games for a player in a week. But for Roto, that doesn't matter. Hot streaks, cold streaks, crazy variabilities of almost like low volume binary, not quite binary, but that sort of value stat. Doesn't matter in Roto. It doesn't matter if you go 3 weeks and not get a single steal and then get 15 over the next 2 weeks, because in the end, all that matters is you've got them all together. So the valuation, I think, has to change. So that's why I tweak the way that I do things. I say all that, and the top of the list is not that different. It's a little different. Got Wemby at 1, Jokic at 2. I don't think I've even mentioned that on this show. Like, if you wanted to have Jokic at 1, just do it. It's fine. It's not going to cost you by doing that. At 3, I've got Luka. Playoff schedule does not matter. So he's a very clear 3, even though he's got a semi-weakness in free throws that he corrected last season, but he hadn't in the past. At 4, I've got Shea. Really strong roto guy, much like we talked about with Durant. The field goal free throw combo, although his free throws were weirdly down, like 81, much like Durant, 81% or something over the last period of the season, the last 2-3 months, which had been his career number. That's something just to watch. I got Anthony Davis at 5 and Joel Embiid at 6. So why, Josh, would you say you wouldn't take Joel Embiid in the first round, but you've got him at 6? Well, Roto is just a very different story. Because in a Roto league, those games missed do not hurt you as much as they do in a head-to-head league. Like, if he still plays 30 games Embiid in a Roto league, it's harder to win. But it doesn't cook you completely. Because when you get to the end of the season, those 30 games still count. If you have Joel Embiid in a head-to-head league and he played 30 games and his season's over by the middle of January, well, they sort of count in the standings, but they have zero impact in the playoffs. None. Has no impact for you whatsoever. But in Roto, you still count it. So the value of Embiid, I think, sits better, much better in a Roto league, and I've got him there at number 6. At number 7, it's Tyrese Halliburton, followed by Steph Curry, Jason Tatum, Trae Young, Anthony Edwards, and Devin Booker. I am talking, this is Roto 9-cat. I also, when I look at Roto 9-cat, I don't completely punt turnovers as I would in a head-to-head league, but I don't fully value turnovers either. And the very clear reason to me in that is as a general rule, when you are playing a Roto league, any fantasy league, if someone is at the bottom, second bottom, at some point they will either check out and they won't set their lineups. They'll become less attentive and they won't set their lineups as often. Right? And sometimes that might be 3 teams, sometimes it might be 1. It is very rare for every single team to lock in and make every move and every waiver decision and every lineup and max out their games played. It is almost impossible for that to happen. Therefore, the bottom 2 teams usually in a Roto setting will probably end up with 11 or 10 Roto points in turnovers. Yes? So we have the general idea in Roto where if you can get 10s across the board, you're going to win. So 10 points in each category, you're going to win usually. Getting the 10 in a turnover category is really quite difficult because there are going to be 1, 2, 3 teams that stop setting lineups that will get 12, 11, 10 points. There'll be the team that has very low assists that gets 9 points in turnovers because assists and turnovers incredibly related. You have low assists, you'll have low turnovers almost as a universal rule. So striving for the lowest amount of turnovers means that your assists then suffer. It means your points suffer as well. And then you might find yourself with 8 Roto points in turnovers, but your points category is at 7 and your assists are at 8 as well. And that does make it hard. And you'll hear this a lot, like people who do a lot of Roto. Like, I was on Dan Besbridge's show the other day, and he does a lot of Roto stuff. But you'll often hear Dan talk about it and go, yeah, when I'm doing Roto leagues, like about halfway through the season, I have to lean into a soft punt of points. And the reason he has to do that is because if you focus a lot on your turnovers, it is very hard to keep your points high. And that you can get away with punting in Roto formats to a degree, but that is the trade-off that you do. So that's why I don't fully weight turnovers when I'm looking at Roto leagues. Anyway, Halliburton at 7, Steph at 8, Tatum at 9, Trae at 10, Edwards at 11, and Booker at 12. And I say that because Trae's going to get turnovers and Edwards is going to get turnovers. Quite a bit of them. So Steph. But I'm not putting Trae as the 38th best player that a straight 9-cat ranking will tell you, because that's just, again, not a realistic representation of how that value is used in any sort of category format. I hope some of this stuff and the strategy that I'm talking and the ideas that come into my mind are useful for you guys. Let's go to the next group of 6 in a Roto League. At number 13, I do have LaMelo Ball. He could easily jump higher. He has some deficiencies in Roto where we can make up more for his games missed in this format. His bad field goals and high turnovers probably even that out a little bit. You'll notice that I've got Kyrie Irving at 14. He's one of the best Roto players that exist. He has absolutely elite percentages. He's a low turnover player with solid assists. He scores, he hits threes, he does bits and pieces of everything. A lot of that doesn't translate as well to category leagues, and in head-to-head formats, he's got a 2-game playoff week, and he's not as good as Luka, so I wouldn't want to take him in round 2. But in Roto, absolutely. I've got Paul George at 15, James Harden at 16, and the fun guy Kawhi Leonard at 17. The Clippers reunite. Kawhi's going to be a top 10 player probably per game, especially in Roto. Pretty comfortably. I just think that, again, the multiple meniscus surgeries, the fact that he broke down again as they tried to play him through more games and back-to-backs, they will not do that again is my guess. Meaning he will not hit 66 games. He might not hit 60. But in Roto, we can deal with that. So we take him in round 2. And I've got LeBron sitting at 18, even though his free throws can be an issue. At number 19, I do have I don't. I have Donovan Mitchell at 19. I've got Fred VanVleet at 20. You notice I've got Domantas Sabonis here at 21 because he has the deficiency in his scoring is a bit low. You can't sort of pick and choose what you want to do. And there are concerns about the DeRozan stuff. And his free throws are bad. And that's a worry. I've got Durant at 22. He's a much better Roto guy than head-to-head guy. The value comes from percentages. He could push higher than this, again, if the free throw attempts bounce back to more than what I think. I've got Scotty Barnes at 23. There is some concern for me with some of the shooting numbers and how that sits. And then I've got Lillard at 24. So that's my top 24 as of the 4th of September. This will change. I go through this stuff as I put up a Porzingis graphic for some reason. I go through this stuff every day and I look at bits and pieces and take on things that people say and ask to question this. And people will question, why have you got Donovan Mitchell dropping from last season? Well, the reason is the minutes. And why do you have Kevin Durant down? Well, the minutes and the potential of the free throw rate and how all that stuff works. And why do you have Harden jumping up? Well, the more minutes and more usage. And where do you have Steph? And all that stuff. And people ask those questions and I'll go in and I'll look at it and I'll look and I'll look and I'll go, okay, well, they've got a point. Maybe that should move. Or I'll go in and go, no, I'm actually pretty happy with how that looks. That's where we sit. Like, for example, someone asked me, hey, why don't you have Cam Thomas projected more? I do not feel comfortable going more than 26.7 points for Cam Thomas. Maybe he does it, but I do not want to push that any higher. And yeah, that's what I sit with. So that is that. The show is done. Your thumbs are out. I know they are. And what they want to do is they just want to hit it. Let me know what you thought. I know there is going to be some people who come in and you can't have this guy low on this. It is really important to understand the nuance, the gaps, the fact that 10 and 11 is not the same difference as 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. And the fact that honestly we could just chuck some of these names in the air and take them at a different spot and it would actually all work out okay. As long as we're not reaching for Io DeSumo at pick 3, sorry Io, you're going to be all right. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.